Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you a story that might sound too absurd to be true. But trust me, it happened. I filed a lawsuit against, well, something, a wooden sugar stick with a bat. Who is this character, you ask? This is none other than Tung 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 Sahur. Here it is, Tung 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 Sahur. This odd character took the internet by storm, and many people fell in love with it. But as much as it looks like just another silly meme, I believe there's more to it than meets the eye. Let me tell you how this all started. For me, this wasn't just another random meme. It became something much more serious. It all began when this character, this wooden stick with a bat, used a phrase that I had created. Tung 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 Sahur. The phrase itself doesn't seem like much, right? But I'll explain why it was so crucial. I began to realize that the line between meme culture and intellectual property was a lot thinner than I ever imagined. So what's the big deal? Well, it's about creative ownership. I argue that this character, this silly wooden sugar stick, has been using my original phrase without permission. And that, my friends, is where the real conflict begins. It all started like any other day. I was scrolling through social media when I first came across this absurd character, Tung 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 Sahur. At first I thought it was just another random meme, something that would come and go. But then I noticed something that made me pause. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the ultimate creator of memes or anything, but as someone who spends a lot of time online, I've been using a particular phrase for quite a while. Tung 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 Sahur. It started as a joke, really. A funny, catchy phrase that seemed perfect for a specific time of day. Early morning, right before dawn, when everyone's preparing for the fast during Ramadan. At least that's how I saw it. But then, out of nowhere, I see this character, a wooden sugar stick with a bat, using my phrase. I couldn't believe it. The phrase I'd been using, the one I thought was uniquely mine, was now being used by a wooden stick with a bat. It might sound silly, but trust me, when you put in the time and effort to create something even remotely funny, you want to make sure it stays yours. Of course, I didn't immediately think about suing. At first, I laughed it off. It's a meme, right? Memes aren't supposed to be taken seriously. But as the days went by, the character kept popping up, using the phrase over and over again, becoming more and more popular. And that's when I realized that something had to be done. People began associating the phrase with Tung 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 Sahur, not with me. It was as if the phrase had lost its meaning, its context, and its originality. It was like watching my creation being hijacked, and that's when I felt I had no choice but to take action. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. It's just a meme. Why would you care? Well, for me, it wasn't just about the phrase. It was about something deeper, the ownership of creative content. In the age of social media, ideas and phrases can spread like wildfire, but that doesn't mean the creator should lose control over them. I realized that my work had been used without my permission, and that was something I couldn't ignore. As I started digging into it, I realized how complex the issue was. The internet is full of memes, viral trends, and content creators who share their ideas freely, often without giving much thought to copyright or intellectual property. But as more and more content gets copied, repurposed, and spread, the lines between fair use and infringement start to blur. Now, some people might say that memes are a form of free speech and creativity. That's fair, and I get it. But there's a difference between taking something and using it in a new way, and taking something without permission and using it to gain attention and followers. And let's be real here, Tung 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 Sahur as a character was gaining popularity fast. The phrase was part of its identity. The character's rise in fame was, in part, thanks to the use of my phrase. And while that's flattering on some level, it was also frustrating. It felt like my contribution was being overlooked while the character was benefiting from it. So, after much thought, I decided to take the next step. I filed a lawsuit. But before you think this is just some silly internet drama, let me tell you, this was about something bigger than that. This was about protecting creators and making sure their work gets the credit it deserves. Filing a lawsuit wasn't an easy decision. I knew it would probably be seen as an overreaction. After all, we're talking about a meme here, not a groundbreaking piece of intellectual property. But that's exactly the point. The world of memes is filled with creative, funny, and unique ideas, and it's important to make sure that the people who come up with these ideas get recognized for their work. In the end, I knew that the real purpose of this lawsuit wasn't just about getting credit for one phrase. It was about standing up for the rights of creators in the digital age, where content can be copied, shared, and transformed without much thought about who originally came up with it. Now, you might be wondering, did I really expect to win this case? Honestly, no. I knew it would be a long shot, but I also knew that sometimes it's worth standing up for what you believe in, even if it's something as seemingly trivial as a phrase from a meme. But as you'll see, the case took some unexpected turns, and the outcome wasn't exactly what I anticipated. Now that the lawsuit was filed, it was time to get into the real meat of the case. The accusations I had made were clear. I was claiming that Tung 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 Sahur had infringed upon my intellectual property by using my phrase without permission. But of course, things weren't going to be that simple. As I prepared for the case, I had to think carefully about how to present my argument. I wasn't just accusing a random meme of stealing my work, I was challenging the very nature of how content is shared, reused, and remixed on the internet. I had to show that even in the world of memes, intellectual property matters. The first step in the process was establishing the origin of the phrase. I explained to the court that I had come up with Tung 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 Sahur as part of a joke I'd shared with a few friends during Ramadan. It was never meant to be something huge, just a fun, catchy phrase that was personal and unique to me. But the moment I saw the character using it in their videos, I knew something had gone wrong. I argued that, while memes are inherently about sharing and remixing content, there's a fine line between taking inspiration from someone's work and outright using it without permission. And that's exactly what happened here. Tung 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 Sahur had taken my phrase, and with it, a piece of my creative expression, and started spreading it across social media, giving no credit to me as the original creator. But as expected, the defense came prepared. The lawyer representing Tung 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 Sahur immediately raised the most obvious point. Memes, by nature, are meant to be spread. The defense argued that the character's use of the phrase wasn't about stealing or taking credit for my work. It was simply part of the internet's free-flowing culture. They contended that memes don't belong to any one person, and once something is out there, it belongs to the collective. Memes are a universal language, the defense attorney argued. They evolve and adapt. They're not the property of any single person. And that's the beauty of the internet. Of course, this line of thinking made sense to some extent. After all, memes are often collaborative in nature. They're reshaped, reinterpreted, and repurposed by countless people around the world. But that didn't mean my work should go unrecognized. The defense also made the argument that Tung 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 Sahur wasn't just a phrase, it was a character, a personality. They claimed that the phrase had taken on a life of its own through the character and that it was impossible to trace the origins of the phrase in the first place. They argued that the very concept of ownership in the meme world is fluid and often untraceable. At this point, things started to get a little more complicated. The defense was right in one sense. Memes do tend to evolve rapidly, and it's often hard to pinpoint where they come from. But that didn't mean my original contribution should be erased. The idea of content ownership in the digital age is murky, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to define some boundaries. I had a few counters prepared. First, I pointed out that while memes can be shared and remixed, that doesn't mean creators should be completely ignored. There are rules and guidelines in place in other areas of intellectual property, like copyright law, that protect creators from having their work used without permission. The fact that a meme is viral doesn't mean it's not someone's original idea. Secondly, I highlighted that the character itself, Tung 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 Sahur, was not merely a passive vessel for spreading a phrase. The character was an active part of the meme, and the phrase had become synonymous with it. As the character gained popularity, so did the phrase, and the phrase became integral to the character's identity. I argued that this made the situation different from a typical meme, where the idea is more general and the creator's influence is harder to trace. To further support my case, I brought in a few expert witnesses, people who had studied meme culture and digital rights. They testified about the complexities of internet content, the rapid spread of memes, and the challenges of asserting ownership in a world where ideas are constantly being shared and remixed. One expert even pointed out that while memes are often created in a spirit of openness, creators still have the right to control their work when it's used in a way that could harm their reputation or credit. One of the key points I made was that my intention wasn't to stifle creativity. I wasn't trying to stop people from making memes or using ideas in new ways. I just wanted to ensure that when my work was used, it was credited properly, and that it didn't get hijacked by a character that had nothing to do with its origin. But the defense wasn't done yet. They brought in their own expert who claimed that the entire premise of intellectual property in memes was flawed. According to them, the very nature of memes, constantly evolving, constantly changing, made them impossible to pin down in terms of ownership. They argued that my lawsuit was an attempt to impose traditional copyright ideas onto a culture that thrives on remixing and adaptation. As the trial went on, I began to realize that this wasn't just about a meme. It was about the larger question of content ownership in the digital age. Was there room for creators to maintain ownership of their work, even when it was part of a culture built on sharing? Or was it a free-for-all where everything was up for grabs once it hit the internet? As you can probably guess, the debate raged on. Each side presented compelling arguments, and there were no easy answers. The case was not just about one phrase or one meme. It was about the future of digital creativity and ownership. And while it may have seemed like a silly case to some, it was one that could have far-reaching implications for creators everywhere. As the case continued, something unexpected happened. Just when I thought things were getting more complicated, a new piece of evidence surfaced that changed everything. It wasn't something I had anticipated, something so bizarre and seemingly unrelated to the case, yet it had the potential to shift the entire legal argument. One day, while reviewing social media posts as part of the discovery process, I came across something strange. A video that had been posted by the same character, Tung 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 Sahur, contained an additional line of dialogue that I had never heard before. The character, this wooden sugar stick, was no longer just repeating my phrase. It was delivering an entirely new message, one that seemed eerily similar to something I had said in an unrelated video a few months earlier. Now, at first, I didn't think much of it. After all, memes evolve, and sometimes they include lines from other creators. But the more I watched the video, the more it hit me. This was not just a random line. It was my voice, my words, almost verbatim. And that was when the realization hit. The character was not only using my phrase without permission, it was also appropriating my own voice and my own content. It was almost as if Tung 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 Sahur had taken more than just a phrase from me. It had taken a piece of my identity as a content creator, blending it into its own, creating something new but still undeniably linked to me. The character's creators had clearly gone beyond simple meme culture. They had crossed a line. They were no longer just using my work as a joke. They were capitalizing on my image, my style, and my voice. This revelation threw me for a loop. It wasn't just about the phrase anymore. Now it was personal. It felt like my creative identity had been stolen and repurposed in a way I hadn't given consent for. It was one thing for a meme to go viral and evolve in unpredictable ways. But this felt like something much more deliberate. I immediately took the new video to my lawyer, and we filed an amendment to the original lawsuit. Now I wasn't just accusing Tung 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 Sahur of using my phrase. I was accusing it of using my voice, my likeness, and my content without permission. It wasn't just about meme culture anymore. It was about protecting the personal creative expressions that make us unique. The defense, of course, was quick to respond. They claimed that the video was a parody, that it was a form of fair use. After all, parody is a well-established defense in intellectual property law. They argued that, by using my voice and my words, they were not infringing upon my rights, but rather they were making fun of them. It was all part of the Internet's humor, they said, where everything gets twisted and remixed into something new. But I wasn't convinced. Parody, to me, meant taking something and putting a creative twist on it, reinterpreting it in a way that was original and new. What Tung 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 Sahur was doing didn't feel like parody. It felt like exploitation. There was no clear transformation of my work. It was a direct appropriation without any acknowledgement of where it came from. It wasn't a remix. It was theft, plain and simple. Of course, the defense pushed back even harder. They argued that memes themselves are inherently remixed content, and that once something goes viral, it becomes part of the Internet's collective culture. They also pointed out that the use of my voice in their video was no different from any other meme using audio clips from popular content. Memes, they argued, exist in a space where ownership is fluid, and creators have to accept that their work will be repurposed, whether they like it or not. The issue of parody and fair use became the focal point of the trial. It was clear that both sides had valid points. The Internet thrives on remixes, adaptations, and memes. But at what point does creative expression become exploitation? When does a meme cross the line from being an innocent form of entertainment to a violation of personal rights? As the trial dragged on, more and more people started to take sides. Some argued that I was in the right, that creators should be able to control their work, even in the world of memes. Others supported the defense, saying that memes are a unique form of expression that shouldn't be constrained by traditional notions of copyright. The conversation quickly spiraled into a broader debate about the future of intellectual property in the digital age. Meanwhile, social media exploded with reactions to the case. Fans of Tung 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 Sahur rallied behind the character, calling it a symbol of Internet freedom. Others supported me, arguing that I had every right to protect my work. The memes began to flood the Internet, some funny, some biting, about the great meme lawsuit. It seemed like everyone had an opinion, and the case became more than just a courtroom drama. It became a cultural event. As things started to spiral, I found myself questioning what I was really fighting for. Was it about the phrase, or was it about something bigger? Was it about my voice, or was it about defending the rights of creators in a world where everything gets shared and remixed? In the end, I realized that the true lesson of the case wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making sure that creators like me could retain some control over the things we put out into the world. And just when I thought I'd seen everything, the case took yet another unexpected turn. The judge called for a mediation session between both parties, hoping to reach an agreement outside of court. This was it, my chance to finally address the issue face-to-face with the creators of Tung 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 Sahur and see if we could come to some sort of resolution. The mediation session was scheduled, and for the first time since the case began, I found myself sitting in the same room as the creators of Tung 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 Sahur. It was surreal. Here we were, two sides that had been battling in court for weeks, finally face-to-face, attempting to find a resolution. I walked into the room with one goal in mind, to be heard. This wasn't about winning a lawsuit anymore. It was about standing up for the creative work I had put into the world. It was about making sure that, no matter how small the project or idea, creators like me had some level of control over their own intellectual property. As the session began, I couldn't help but feel a sense of tension in the room. On one side, there were the creators of Tung 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 Sahur, two young people, both passionate about memes and Internet culture. They were laughing and joking at first, almost as if the whole thing was just one big misunderstanding. But I could see that they were starting to take the situation seriously once they realized how much this meant to me. The mediator, a neutral third party, started by asking us to explain our sides. I gave my version of the story, emphasizing how I had created the phrase Tung 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 Sahur as part of a personal project, something that was important to me. I talked about how, over time, the phrase had become part of my identity and how seeing it used without permission felt like a violation of my creative rights. The creators of the character listened intently. When it was their turn to speak, they explained that they never intended to steal my work. They argued that memes are a collaborative form of expression meant to be shared freely. They admitted that they had used my phrase, but they insisted that it was never meant to harm me or claim ownership over my creation. It was just part of the process of creating content in the meme world, they said. At first, it felt like we were talking in circles. They didn't understand my perspective, and I struggled to explain why this felt so personal. But as the session continued, we started to make some headway. I realized that they truly didn't grasp the concept of intellectual property in the digital age. To them, it was all about fun, jokes, and viral content. But to me, it was about respect for creators and the work they put out into the world. One of the creators brought up an interesting point. They said that in the world of memes, it's difficult to draw clear lines. Everything is based on shared culture, inside jokes, and the fluidity of internet trends. They didn't see how one phrase, one meme, could belong to just one person. To them, memes are meant to be free, something that belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. As we went back and forth, I began to see where they were coming from. Memes are indeed a unique form of expression. They're meant to be playful and unstructured. But that didn't mean that creators couldn't hold on to some level of ownership. It wasn't about restricting the creativity of others. It was about ensuring that credit was given where credit was due. After several hours of discussion, we finally reached a compromise. The creators of Tung 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 Sahur agreed to acknowledge my role in creating the phrase in their future content. They didn't have to remove the character or stop using the phrase altogether, but they agreed to credit me in any future videos or social media posts that featured my phrase. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like a fair one. We also discussed the possibility of collaborating in the future. They expressed interest in working together on a new project, one that would combine our creative efforts while respecting each other's work. At first, I was hesitant, but the more we talked, the more it made sense. Maybe this whole situation wasn't about conflict. It was about finding a way to coexist in a space where creativity thrives and evolves. In the end, we shook hands, and the mediation came to a close. The lawsuit was dismissed, and the case was officially resolved. We had reached an agreement, and while it wasn't the dramatic courtroom victory I had initially hoped for, it felt like a win in its own way. It wasn't about taking down Tung 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 Sahur. It was about standing my ground and ensuring that creators, big or small, have the right to be recognized for their work. As I walked out of the mediation room, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. It had been a long, hard journey, but it was one that taught me a lot about the digital age, about intellectual property, and about the way memes and internet culture are reshaping the world of creativity. Looking back on the case, I realized that the real victory wasn't in the legal battle. It was in the conversations that had been started. The conversations about creator rights, about the balance between free expression and ownership, and about how we navigate a world where everything seems to be fair game for remixing. This experience has also given me a new perspective on the nature of memes and internet culture. I still love memes. I still believe they're a powerful form of communication, a way for people to connect and share laughs. But I also believe that creators deserve to have their voices heard and respected. In a world where everything moves so quickly, it's important to remember that behind every meme, there's a creator, someone who put time, effort, and creativity into making something unique. As for Tung 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 Sahur, the character is still out there, still making people laugh, still spreading the phrase that started it all. But now there's a little more recognition, a little more respect, and a little more understanding of what it means to be a creator in the digital age. Now that the case was behind me, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The trial, the mediation, and the conversations I'd had throughout the process had changed the way I viewed internet culture and the value of creative work. What had started as a seemingly ridiculous lawsuit against a character that was, essentially, a wooden sugar stick with a bat, had become a deep dive into the complexities of intellectual property in the digital age. Over the past few months, I had learned more than I ever expected to. I had learned about the intersection of law, creativity, and the Internet, and I had learned how to stand my ground as a creator. The experience had challenged me, but it had also given me a platform to discuss the very real issues that face digital creators today. One thing that really stood out to me was how much the Internet has changed the way we think about ownership. A decade ago, the idea of a meme being something worth defending would have seemed absurd. Memes were just jokes, and they didn't belong to anyone. But today, things are different. In a world where digital content spreads faster than ever, and where every meme can go viral, the lines between personal ownership and collective culture are increasingly blurred. While the idea of free use is ingrained in meme culture, the case proved that creators do have a right to protect their work. I had never intended for my phrase to be anything more than a passing joke among friends. But once it had gained traction and been co-opted by others, it became part of my identity. And that identity was worth protecting. One thing I will always carry with me is the importance of standing up for what you believe in. I could have backed down at any point during the case. I could have accepted the idea that memes are just part of internet culture and that creators don't have the right to control their work. But I chose not to. I chose to fight for recognition and respect, not just for me, but for every creator out there who has ever felt like their work was taken for granted. I also realized that the internet doesn't have to be a place of constant conflict. In the end, the resolution wasn't about me versus Tung 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 Sahur. It wasn't about taking down the character or erasing its existence. It was about finding a way to coexist and respect each other's creative contributions. The agreement we reached in mediation allowed us to do just that, and it showed that even in a world full of remixes and adaptations, there's room for creators to maintain their integrity. Looking back, I'm proud of how I handled the situation. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself. But through it all, I stayed true to my vision and defended my creative rights. And in the process, I helped spark a much-needed conversation about the future of digital creativity. Since the case, I've continued to create and share my work with the world. The phrase Tung 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 Sahur has become part of meme culture, but now, whenever it's used, it's accompanied by a small acknowledgement of my contribution. It's a reminder that, in this digital world, creators matter. Our voices matter, and our work is worth something. I don't know what the future holds for memes or for content creators like me, but I do know that the internet is changing, and with it, the way we think about ownership and creativity. The case may have been about a silly meme, but the lessons I learned are anything but trivial. They're lessons about respect, recognition, and the evolving nature of digital culture. Ultimately, the case wasn't just about me fighting for a phrase. It was about the broader fight for creators' rights in a world where everything is shared, remixed, and repurposed. It was about ensuring that, even in the ever-changing landscape of the internet, creators can hold on to a sense of ownership and control over their work. As I move forward, I'll continue to create and contribute to the digital world, but I'll also keep fighting for the rights of creators everywhere. I'll never forget the lesson this case taught me, that even the smallest piece of creativity, whether it's a phrase, an image, or a character, deserves to be respected and protected. And so, the story of Tung 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 Sahur comes to an end. Not with a courtroom drama, but with a resolution, a compromise that allowed both sides to move forward with mutual respect. It was a case that taught me more about the digital world than I could have ever imagined, and a reminder that even in a world where everything seems fair game, there's always room for creators to assert their rights. Now, I look at the memes, the jokes, and the content that flood the internet with a new perspective. And while I'm still passionate about the free and creative nature of the digital world, I also know that creators must be given the respect and recognition they deserve. Because at the end of the day, the internet is full of voices, and every voice has the right to be heard.